I still remember the exact moment when my entire life came crashing down, not in some dramatic, earth-shattering explosion, but in the quietest, most gut-wrenching way possible, like a slow, deliberate stab to the heart. It started with an innocent enough evening, a Thursday night that should have been like any other, except it wasn't. My wife, Emily, had been acting strange for weeks, shorter conversations, distant glances, a phone that was never out of her hand but always turned away from my sight. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was just being paranoid, that we had been married for 12 years, and that kind of thing didn't happen to people like us. Except it did. She had told me she was going out with some of her friends from work, something she did from time to time, but this time, it felt off. Maybe it was the way she got dressed, paying just a little too much attention to her makeup, wearing the perfume she only used for special occasions. Maybe it was how she checked her reflection in the hallway mirror 3 times before leaving, smoothing down the hem of her dress with nervous fingers. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, kissed her goodbye, and told her to have fun, all while my gut twisted into knots. By 10:30, she still wasn't home. That wasn't unusual. Midnight passed. Still nothing. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts were read but not answered. I sat in the living room, staring at the darkened TV screen, listening to the ticking of the clock, feeling something inside me begin to crack. At 1 a.m, the front door finally creaked open, and she stepped inside, pausing when she saw me sitting there in the dim glow of the lamp. "Oh," she said, blinking as if surprised to find me awake. "You're still up?" "I was waiting for you," I said, my voice even, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "How was your night?" "It was fine," she replied too quickly, slipping off her heels and placing them neatly by the door, her fingers twitching as she smoothed down her dress again. "Just a little longer than I expected." "Really?" I leaned back, folding my arms across my chest. "Who all was there?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "You know, the usual group: Sophie, Karen, Ashley." I let the silence stretch between us, watching her fidget under my gaze, before I finally stood and walked past her. "I'm going to bed," I said simply, but inside, a storm was brewing. I barely slept that night. My mind was racing, piecing together the little inconsistencies in her story, replaying every moment of the last few months in my head. By morning, I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited until she was in the shower, her phone charging on the nightstand, and I picked it up. My hands were shaking as I entered the passcode, her birthday, the same as always. The messages were there, right in front of me, like a punch to the stomach. His name was Daniel. The texts were explicit, detailed, sickening. There were photos, ones that made my vision blur with rage. I scrolled further, past the heart emojis, past the plans for their next meeting, past her words she had once said to me, now given to someone else. The bathroom door opened, steam rolling into the bedroom as she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping down her shoulders. The moment she saw me holding her phone, her expression shifted from casual to pure, unfiltered panic. "Steven," she said, her voice a whisper, the blood draining from her face. I turned the screen toward her, showing her the truth she had so desperately hidden. "Care to explain?" She didn't speak right away, her lips slightly parted as if the right words were just out of reach. Her eyes flicked from my face to the phone in my hand, then back to me, calculating, deciding whether to deny or explain. I didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, waiting. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until finally, she took a slow step forward, gripping the edge of her towel a little tighter around herself, like it could somehow shield her from the reality she had created. "Steven, I can explain," she said, her voice softer now, careful, like I was a wild animal that might lash out if she wasn't gentle enough. I turned the phone back to myself, scrolling again, just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. The messages were still there, clear as day, her words written with no hesitation, no remorse, no shame. "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around the phone before I looked at her again. "Explain what? That you've been screwing this guy behind my back? That you've been sneaking around, lying to my face while you play house with someone else?" Her jaw clenched slightly, and for a second, something flickered in her expression, annoyance, maybe even anger, as if I was the one in the wrong for calling her out. But then it was gone, replaced by something more carefully crafted. "It's not what you think," she tried again, shaking her head, taking another step closer. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. It's not what I think? Then tell me, Emily, what exactly am I looking at? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife has been screwing some guy named Daniel and sending him messages that make me want to vomit. I tossed the phone onto the bed, watching as she flinched at the sound of it hitting the mattress. How long? She swallowed hard, hesitating. How long? A few months, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt my stomach tighten, my fist clenching at my sides. Months. Not a drunken mistake, not a moment of weakness, but something sustained, something that took effort and planning, something she had chosen over and over again. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing for a moment before turning back to her. Why? Her lips parted again, but no words came out, as if she hadn't expected me to ask that, as if she didn't even know the answer herself. Then, finally, she exhaled, her shoulders slumping slightly. I don't know. I let out another sharp laugh, shaking my head. That's bullshit. You don't just fall onto some guy's dick for months without a reason, Emily. Her expression hardened slightly, and she lifted her chin, finally finding something solid to stand on. Maybe if you actually paid attention to me once in a while, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. She shot back, her voice laced with something almost triumphant, like she had been waiting to say it. I stared at her, stunned for a moment, before pure, unfiltered rage surged through me. Are you seriously trying to blame me for this? You want to act like some neglected victim when you were the one sneaking around, lying, betraying me? I worked my ass off for this marriage, for our life together, and this is what you do. She crossed her arms, defensive now. I'm not saying it's your fault, Stephen, but you haven't exactly been the most present husband. Always working late, always exhausted, always distracted. I was working to give us a good life, to make sure we were comfortable, to make sure we had everything we needed. She scoffed. Yeah, well, maybe I needed more than just a nice house and bills paid on time. Maybe I needed to feel like I actually mattered to you. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in the anger boiling inside me, but it was impossible. Every word out of her mouth felt like another slap to the face, another knife in my back. So what? You just decided to go find some other guy to make you feel special? That's your excuse? You couldn't talk to me, tell me how you felt like an actual adult? Her gaze dropped for a moment, but she quickly recovered, her walls going up again. Would it have changed anything? I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. You didn't even give me a chance. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, the weight of everything crashing down between us. The bedroom that had once been ours felt foreign now, unfamiliar, tainted by the knowledge that she had been with someone else, that she had invited another man into a space that was supposed to be sacred between us. Finally, I exhaled, running a hand down my face. I need you to leave. Her eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected that. What? You heard me, I said, my voice steady now, the initial shock wearing off, leaving behind something colder, something final. I need you to pack your things and get the hell out of my house. She hesitated, searching my face for something, maybe hoping I would back down, that I would somehow let her off the hook. But I didn't. I just stood there, waiting, unwilling to give her even an inch of sympathy. Eventually, she nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. I'll go. I watched as she turned, moving toward the closet, yanking out a suitcase. Every movement she made was sharp, angry, like she was the one who had been wronged, like I was the villain in this story. And maybe, in her mind, I was. Maybe she had convinced herself that what she did was justified, that she had a right to betray me. But I knew the truth. As she packed, I stepped out of the room, walking down the hallway, my chest tight, my hands shaking. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how I was supposed to move forward from this. But one thing was certain, whatever life I had before this moment was over. I stood in the hallway, listening to the sound of the suitcase wheels dragging against the hardwood floor, the zippers being yanked closed with unnecessary force, the closet doors slamming as she ripped through her belongings. Every noise felt like another piece of my life being packed away, another reminder that everything I had spent over a decade building with her had been reduced to this, a rushed, angry exit with no real closure, no moment of clarity, just betrayal and bitterness. I could have gone back inside, could have argued more, demanded more answers, but what was the point? She had already shown me who she was. There was nothing left to salvage. When she finally appeared in the hallway, suitcase in one hand, purse slung over her shoulder, she didn't meet my eyes at first. She just stood there, as if waiting for me to say something, waiting for some part of me to take it all back, to beg her to stay. I wasn't going to. I had nothing left to give her. I had spent years giving, bending, sacrificing, trusting, and she had taken all of it and thrown it away for some asshole named Daniel. "Where am I supposed to go?" she finally asked, her voice quieter now, less defensive. I shrugged, leaning against the wall, arms crossed over my chest, too drained to even pretend to care. "Not my problem." Her jaw tightened, and she let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You really don't care, do you?" I pushed myself off the wall, stepping closer, forcing her to actually look at me. "You cheated on me, Emily. For months. Lied to my face every single day. And now you want me to care about where you're going to sleep tonight? Go stay with your boyfriend. I'm sure he'd love to have you." Her expression shifted, just for a second, something flickering in her eyes that almost looked like guilt, but I refused to acknowledge it. She had made her choices, and now she had to deal with the consequences. I stepped past her, making my way to the front door, unlocking it and pulling it open. I didn't look back at her as I spoke again. "Just go." She hesitated, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually say something meaningful, something honest. But she didn't. She just let out a sharp breath, rolled her suitcase forward, and walked past me, stepping out into the night without another word. I closed the door behind her, locking it, sealing her out of my life in one final movement. The silence that followed was unbearable. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the closed door, my mind racing but completely blank at the same time. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what came next. My wife was gone. My marriage was over. And I was alone in a house that no longer felt like home. Eventually, I moved. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a drink, then another after that. The alcohol burned, but it didn't do anything to numb the ache in my chest, the anger twisting in my stomach, the unbearable weight of knowing that the person I had trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst possible way. My phone sat on the counter, buzzing every few minutes with messages from her, at first just simple things like "Can we talk?" And I didn't mean for it to happen like this, then shifting into more desperate attempts, "Please answer me," and "Steven, I need you to understand." I didn't respond. By the time morning rolled around, my head was pounding, my throat dry, my body heavy with exhaustion. I had barely slept, dozing in and out on the couch, waking up every time I thought I heard a car outside, as if some part of me still expected her to come back, to knock on the door, to apologize, to tell me it had all been a mistake. But she didn't. She was gone, and I had to figure out what the hell to do next. I forced myself to get up, to shower, to eat something even though I had no appetite. I ignored the unread messages still piling up on my phone and instead focused on what mattered now, practical things. Calling a lawyer. Changing the locks. Making sure she had no way to come back in without my permission. It was around noon when my best friend, Ryan, showed up unannounced, letting himself in with the spare key I had forgotten to take back from him months ago. He took one look at me, unshaven, exhausted, probably still reeking of last night's whiskey, and let out a long breath, shaking his head. "Well, shit," he said. "I take it things didn't go well?" I snorted, rubbing a hand over my face. "You could say that." He walked past me, straight to the kitchen, grabbing himself a glass of water before leaning against the counter. "She finally admit to it?" I nodded, jaw clenching. "Yeah, months. Some guy from goddamn work." Ryan let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Jesus, man. I knew something was up, but, damn." I let out a bitter laugh, grabbing the closest chair and sinking into it. "Yeah, damn." For a moment, neither of us spoke. He just stood there, watching me, and I could tell he was trying to figure out what the hell to say, how to somehow make this situation better, even though we both knew nothing could fix it. "You gonna be okay?" he finally asked, voice softer now, less casual. I shrugged, staring down at my hands. "I don't know. Probably not. But what choice do I have?" Ryan sighed, setting his glass down before walking over, sitting across from me. "Look, I know you probably don't want to hear this right now, but you're better off without her. I know it doesn't feel like it yet, but you will be." I looked up at him, my oldest friend, the guy who had been with me through every major moment of my life, and for the first time since I found out, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the realization that he was right, that Emily was never going to be the person I thought she was. Maybe it was just the exhaustion finally catching up to me. Either way, I nodded, exhaling slowly. "Yeah," I said. "Maybe." The first real test came 2 days later when Emily showed up at the house, uninvited, standing at the door like she still had a right to be there, like she hadn't thrown everything away. I had just finished talking to my lawyer that morning, working through the process of filing for divorce, making sure I had everything lined up before she could try anything. I was already drained, already stretched thin, and the last thing I needed was to see her face, to hear whatever excuses she had prepared. But there she was, standing on the porch, looking at me like she still knew me, like she still had some kind of claim over my life. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at her, waiting for her to explain why she thought she had any reason to be here. She shifted on her feet, gripping the strap of her purse tightly, her shoulders tense like she was bracing for an attack. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quiet, careful. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe but making no move to let her inside. "We've already talked." She exhaled, clearly frustrated, shaking her head slightly. "Stephen, please. I don't want to do this like this. I just want to explain." I let out a sharp breath, glancing away for a moment before looking back at her. "Explain what, Emily? That you spent months screwing some other guy? That you lied to my face every single day? That you let me believe we were fine while you were out playing around behind my back?" Her jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with something, anger, guilt, maybe both. "It wasn't like that." I laughed, shaking my head. "Then tell me, Emily, what was it like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that." She swallowed, looking down for a moment before taking a slow breath, as if trying to steady herself. "I made a mistake." I clenched my teeth, feeling my patience snap. "A mistake?" I repeated, stepping closer. "Leaving the oven on is a mistake. Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. Sleeping with someone else for months is a choice." She flinched, her grip tightening on her purse, but she didn't argue. Instead, she exhaled, shaking her head. "I wasn't happy, Stephen." I let out a bitter laugh, running a hand down my face. "Oh, here we go. The classic excuse. You weren't happy, so instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to screw some guy from work." She closed her eyes briefly, like she was trying to keep herself together. "I don't expect you to understand." "You're right. I don't," I cut in sharply. "Because I was in the same marriage as you, and not once did I think cheating was the solution." Her eyes snapped up to mine, a flash of something defensive in her expression. "You weren't exactly present, Stephen. You were always working, always exhausted, always somewhere else even when you were home." I felt like I was married to a ghost. I stared at her, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "So, what? This is my fault now? You cheated because I was working hard to provide for us." She shook her head quickly, stepping forward like she wanted me to understand. "No, that's not what I'm saying. I felt alone." I clenched my jaw, letting the words sink in, letting myself actually hear what she was saying, and for the first time, I realized that she truly believed this, that in her mind, she had justified everything she had done because she had convinced herself that she was the victim. I took a step back, shaking my head. "You know what, Emily? If you were so miserable, you could have left. You could have told me how you felt. You could have ended things before you went and destroyed everything we had. But you didn't. You wanted to have both. You wanted the security of our marriage while you ran around with someone else. And now that it's all fallen apart, now that I know the truth, you want to stand here and tell me you were unhappy." She swallowed, her eyes glassy now, but I wasn't interested in her tears. I had spent too many nights trying to be a good husband, too many years trusting her, too much time believing that we were a team. And she had burned it all to the ground. "I don't know how to fix this," she admitted finally, her voice small. I let out a slow breath, looking at her for a long moment, taking in the woman I had spent over a decade loving, the woman I had built a life with, the woman who had shattered everything in a way that could never be undone. "You can't," I said simply. For the first time, real panic flickered across her face. "Stephen, please. We don't have to end this like this. I know I hurt you, but we've been together too long to just throw it all away." I felt something break inside me, something final. "You already did," I said, my voice calm now, steady in a way it hadn't been before. "The second you decided to cheat, you threw it all away. I'm just making it official." Her breath hitched slightly, and for a moment, she just stood there, staring at me like she wanted to say something else, like she was still hoping there was a way to undo all of this. But there wasn't. Finally, she nodded, swallowing hard as she stepped back. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She turned, walking toward her car, and I didn't watch her drive away. I just stepped back inside, locking the door behind me, exhaling slowly as the weight of it all settled over me. It was over. Whatever came next, I would face it alone. The first few days after Emily left were a blur of silence, paperwork, and moments where I would catch myself expecting to hear her voice, only to remember that she wasn't coming back. The house felt different now, not just empty but unfamiliar, like I was living in someone else's life. I had spent over a decade building this home with her, but now, every room felt tainted, every piece of furniture a reminder of the lies, the betrayal, the fact that nothing we had meant enough to her to keep her from throwing it all away. I kept busy, because keeping busy was the only thing stopping me from sitting down and thinking too hard about the fact that my entire life had just been split in two. Ryan came over on the third day, unannounced as usual, walking in with a six-pack and dropping it onto the counter like it was some kind of cure-all. He didn't say anything right away, just opened 2 beers, handed me one, and leaned against the counter, watching me like he was waiting to see if I was going to fall apart. I wasn't. Not yet. Anyway. You talked to your lawyer? He finally asked, taking a sip from his bottle. I nodded, setting my own beer down without drinking. Yeah. Divorce papers are being filed. She'll get served soon. Ryan exhaled, shaking his head. Good. You don't need to drag this out. I laughed, short and bitter. Yeah, well, she seems to think we do. She texted me this morning. Wants to talk again. Ryan groaned, rolling his eyes. What the hell is there to talk about? She made her choice. Now she has to live with it. I shrugged, leaning against the counter. I don't know. Maybe she just wants to ease her guilt. Maybe she actually thinks she can fix this. Either way, I don't care. I told her I wasn't interested. Ryan studied me for a moment before nodding. Good. Last thing you need is her messing with your head right now. You need to focus on moving forward. Moving forward. It sounded simple enough, but where the hell was I supposed to move forward to? I had spent so long being Emily's husband that I didn't even know what my life looked like without her in it. I had always thought we were a team, that we were building something together, and now I had to figure out how to start over when I never planned on doing this alone. I finally took a sip of my beer, letting the cold settle in my chest before speaking again. I don't even know where to start. Ryan frowned, setting his bottle down. You start by remembering who the hell you were without her. You start by realizing that she was the one who screwed up, not you. And you start by doing whatever the hell makes you happy for once. I scoffed, shaking my head. Yeah? And what the hell is that? Ryan smirked, pushing himself off the counter. Guess you're gonna have to figure that out. But I'll tell you one thing, you sure as hell aren't gonna find it sitting around this damn house thinking about her. He had a point. I had spent too much time sitting in this house, surrounded by everything that reminded me of her, of us, of the life we had that turned out to be nothing but a lie. Maybe it was time to stop letting it control me. The next day, I took the first step. I went to work like it was any other morning, but this time, I didn't let myself fall into autopilot, didn't let myself just go through the motions. I told my boss I needed some time off, that I had things to deal with, and for the first time in years, I actually put myself first. He didn't argue, just nodded and told me to take whatever time I needed. That night, I packed a bag, booked a hotel, and got the hell out of town for a few days. I didn't go far, just a few hours away, to a place by the coast that I used to love before life got too busy. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't check my phone unless it was for something important. I just let myself breathe. The first night, I sat by the water, listening to nothing but the waves and my own thoughts. I thought about everything, about Emily, about the years I had spent with her, about the future that no longer existed. And for the first time since it all fell apart, I felt something other than anger or sadness. I felt relief. Because the truth was, Emily had already been gone long before I found out about the affair. She had checked out of our marriage, of our life together, and I had been too blind to see it. She had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. And I was choosing to move the hell on.